Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. We'll get started in just a few minutes. Good afternoon. Thanks so much for joining us today. We'll get started in just a minute. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Martha Snow, and I'm the Associate Director of Programs at the Urban Design Forum. I hope everyone got outside yesterday and got a glimpse of spring in New York. I know I took a walk in my neighborhood and felt just a little taste of the joy and the life of the streets that we all know and love in New York. We're so glad you can join us today for an exciting conversation on prioritizing pedestrians in Fortaleza, Brazil. In case you're new to the Urban Design Forum, we are an independent membership organization that mobilizes civic leaders to confront defining issues in the built environment. We empower professionals of diverse backgrounds, industries, and perspectives to shape a better future for all New Yorkers. We investigate complex challenges in the built environment, study alternative approaches from cities around the world, and advance progressive strategies to build a more democratic city. A big thanks for the continuing support of our fellows, board of directors, and our director circle for making this work possible. So today's presentation is a part of our Streets Ahead initiative. So over the past year, the forum has been exploring ways in which New York City can boldly transform our city streets to create connected communities. Following the landmark transformation of our streets to support social distancing during COVID-19, we now have a historic opportunity to take the best of what we saw our streets could be and make those changes last beyond the crisis. We're building a brain trust of experts and advocates to dream up new possibilities for the future of our streets through the lenses of climate, commerce, care, culture, and continuity. And this spring, we'll share a suite of new visions and mobilizing ideas for New Yorkers and work with the new city administration to shape more people-centered streets. So stay tuned for that work. As we render new possibilities and assemble these debates and discussions, we also want to hear from you. What people-centered streets should we be looking at? Who should we be speaking to next, both in New York and abroad? So please feel free to plug your thoughts into the chat. So in our exploration of the streets, we also know that in New York, we don't have all the answers. Cities around the world are making great strides to redesign and reprioritize their street space for children and for neighborhoods, as we heard about several weeks ago in Barcelona. And we have so much to learn from being in dialogue with leaders around the world. And today especially, we're wishing for peace and safety for our friends in Ukraine and comfort to Ukrainians who call New York home. Today, I'm thrilled that we'll be moderating a conversation with three wonderful leaders in South America and in New York. In 2014, the National Association of City Transportation Officials, or NACTO, launched the Global Designing Cities Initiative to inspire a shift towards safe, sustainable, and healthy cities through transforming streets. The team worked with city practitioners around the world to design and implement innovative new street design projects. And Fortaleza, Brazil was one of those cities. In the last few years, Fortaleza has taken major steps to reimagine its public streets by prioritizing pedestrians to reduce traffic fatalities. And the city's highly engaged community-led process and tactical design approach permitted fast, low cost, and high impact experimentation. And now cities like Recife and Salvador are following suit. So for today's event, we're excited to have Beatriz or Bia Rodrigues of Vital Strategies and Eduardo Pompeo Martins of NACTO's Global Designing Cities Initiative share their work in Fortaleza and beyond. After their presentation, I'll be joined by our invited New York City respondent, Jackson Chabot, Director of Public Space Advocacy at Open Plans for our exchange. So I'm really excited to think together about how cities like Fortaleza, Recife, and Salvador can learn together from cities like New York. So let's get started. If I can welcome Eduardo and Bia on screen with me. Hi, Eduardo, and hi, Bia. Thanks for joining. So let me quickly just introduce our two incredible speakers, and then I'll pass the mic first to Eduardo to kick us off. So Eduardo Pompeo Martins is a program manager at NACTO's Global Designing Cities Initiative. As part of Bloomberg's initiative for global road safety, he provides technical assistance to multiple cities in South America in applying design principles from the Global Street Design Guide. And prior to joining NACTO GDCI, Eduardo worked in SP Urbanismo, an agency within the Sao Paulo city government, where he was involved in projects and programs related to urban mobility and public spaces. So really excited to have Eduardo share a little bit about his work with us today. And quickly, I'll also introduce Bia so that we can jump straight into her presentation as well. So Bia Rodrigues is an architect and urban designer who in 2017 joined the Bloomberg Initiative as an urban design coordinator, first at Fortaleza and later at Recife and Salvador, supporting the city to implement urban mobility best practices aimed at reducing road deaths. And prior to joining Bloomberg, Bia also served as a transportation planner in the city of Fortaleza, developing projects for safer streets for vulnerable road users and managing bike share systems. So I want to thank you both so much for joining us today. We're excited and privileged to hear about your visionary and transformative work you've led. And with that, I'll pass it over to Eduardo first.
Okay, thanks. Thank you so much, Martha and Guillermo for the invite. Hi, everyone. It's really exciting to be here. Let me share my screen for a sec. It's really exciting being following the Streets Ahead series, and it's been amazing. It's a pleasure to be here today. I know we all are super excited to hear from Bia firsthand the experience of Fortaleza. So I'll try to be very brief, just to give a quick introduction about how we at GDCI work with cities like Fortaleza to promote safer streets and better street design globally. Martha introduced our organization. The Global Design Cities Initiative is a program of NACTO, and we came about mostly in the moment we were joining the Bloomberg Initiative for global road safety, along with other expert organizations on road safety in different areas, not necessarily infrastructure or street design. And basically with the common goal of addressing this public health crisis of road traffic fatalities globally, and always having in mind the multiple co-benefits, of course, of better street design to our cities. As you can imagine, for an NACTO program, our first project was to develop a global street design guide. It does build off some of the NACTO North American guides, and also includes input from experts from over 70 cities in more than 40 countries globally, with the common goal of like shifting priorities and effectively putting people first on our streets. The guide brings strategies, tools to design streets for all street users, and also ambitious yet practical examples of how cities can transform their existing streets to become safer, healthier, more resilient, and improve livability overall. After developing the guide, we started a new phase in which we provide technical assistance based on the guide to cities internationally. And of course, Fortaleza is one of the most successful stories we have to tell. So I'm glad you'll be able to hear from Bia today. And as you all know too well, transforming streets isn't simple. It takes a lot of effort and also like a wide variety of tools and tactics and strategies to get there effectively. So what we do is we work with cities, collaborating with their teams to develop local street design manuals and update policy to reflect international best practices in design guidance, offer capacity building trainings to help local practitioners to see and design their streets differently. Probably not the most sexy part, but we also believe a lot in the importance of boosting silos and fostering interagency collaboration, and of course, centering community engagement in the process of transforming our streets. We also like to go on site and trial new ideas with the local teams and work and develop this knowledge together and use those short-term interim transformations as a way to try and to demonstrate that new bold ideas are possible, making sure cities collect the right metrics to evaluate and demonstrate the impact of such interventions on safety and beyond on many other co-benefits, to then create momentum and move to permanent implementation of new ideas, institutionalizing these and moving from projects to programs to scale up change across the city. I know this all sounds a bit too linear, and I guess like the process is not always like that. But I think the most important piece here, or transformation, is to demonstrate that change is possible, to win the hearts and minds, and to show to local practitioners that other street design strategies are possible, and to show to communities that street space can be very different and can serve communities in very different ways. Show that we can and should reclaim more space for people, like in this example in Recife, and promote safer and better mobility systems in those cities through better street design, as you all know. And finally, of course, reclaim and create a lot of great public space that makes cities not only safer, but also more livable and vibrant and equitable and interesting. So there was like the quick intro for context of our work at GDCI. I've been lucky to work with Bia directly in many of these projects since 2017, for almost 5 years now. And I'm really happy that you have the opportunity to hear from her firsthand about the transformations in Fortaleza. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Edu. I don't know if I can try to start right away, but I just wanted to thank you all from the Urban Design Forum team for the invitation. I'm really excited to be here, and it's always a blast for us to share with you the information and all the experience that we had with the Fortaleza team, and also now with the Recife and Salvador team. So I'm going to share with you my screen. So can you see it? I think it's showing. So Maras just did a great job introducing now, so I'm going to skip this part. And Edu already presented a little bit about the initiative. And thanks, Edu, for not showing too many spoilers of the project that we did together. I hope that I can share with you some of the experience that we had. And before talking a little bit about the project itself, I just wanted to present to you a little bit of Fortaleza, because I think that most of you don't know about our city very much, because it's not one of the most known cities of Brazil. This is Fortaleza, is the fifth biggest city in Brazil with almost 2.7 million inhabitants. And this is the typical photo that we always use in the presentations. But I really wanted to show you the other sides of Fortaleza. So I think it's really important to
Excuse me.
Okay.
Yes, sorry. I'm not sure. I think we are seeing your PowerPoint view,
Okay.
not the slides yet. Sorry for interrupting.
Can you see it?
Not yet, but not sure if it's just me.
Just a minute. Sorry, guys. I'm just trying to. So can you see the full screen?
Thanks, Bia. Yes, we can see your screen now.
Okay, thank you, Marta. So yeah, just continue here. I just wanted to show you a little bit more of Fortaleza, not only the good part, but also that Fortaleza is a city full of inequalities. It's one of the most unequal cities in the world. So I think it's really important to show also this part of the city to understand how important these projects were and continue being to the city. So Fortaleza, the city of Fortaleza started in 2013, a great urban transformation. And the vision for the future, it was a city focused on people. And since the beginning, the technical projects were a key part of this urban transformation. So we started doing this kind of projects because they were fast, low cost, high impact, and also because it was a great opportunity for the population to see and experiment the project before the capital project, and for the technicians to be convinced of these bolder projects that were not common in the city at that time. So it was really important to convince everyone. So the pilot projects were with a constant monitoring and communication were essential for this paradigm shift. And these, along with a bigger policy of urban mobility and road safety in the city, it was responsible for 6 reductions in a row of road fatality deaths.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. So sorry to interrupt you. It does look like the slides aren't advancing.
Okay.
So we're still on the This is Fortaleza slides. Maybe if you could scroll along with us, or go to presentation mode.
Sorry. Just a minute. I don't know what's happening. I'm just going to.
Thanks everyone for your patience. You know, the joys of technology.
Yeah. I'm just trying to save it to PDF to know if it's going to solve the problem. So let me know if it helps.
Great, thank you so much.
No problem. I'm sorry, now the computer is a little slow.
No problem. Thanks again, everyone, for your patience. And in the meantime, as we're doing this, please feel free to start popping questions into the chat or into the direct Q&A box. We'll be sourcing your questions throughout the conversation. So really looking forward to getting your questions involved as well. All right. Thanks so much, Bia.
You're welcome. Can you see it now? The full screen?
Yep, I can see full screen, and it looks like we're on the first slide now.
Yeah,
Perfect.
okay.
Awesome.
So now, okay, you're on the graph slide with the graph of the reduction.
Yes, we are.
Thanks.
Perfect.
So we just also got a 51.4% reduction in these tax of reduction of fatalities in Fortaleza. And I just wanted to share with you a bunch of projects that we've worked with the city. And the first one was at Cidade 2000. I just wanted to highlight that each project has a different story. So I'm just going to detail a little bit about this first one and why we did the intervention there. In this specific area, the population was complaining a little bit about the conditions of the area, and the city finally got the budget to do aeroclification. There was already a project, a proposal that hadn't been discussed with the population. So the next step that we thought we had to do was discuss scenarios with the people. Once we got there, we realized that they weren't understanding much of the proposal that we had. So it was a proposal to change a little bit of our strategy. So we decided to do a 15-day intervention to improve road safety and increase the public spaces in the area, just to show population how the project could be and what it could bring for their area. And this was the area before the intervention, and this was the area after. So it's a big change that we had in Cidade 2000. We got to reclaim almost more than 1,000 square meters for public space for pedestrians. You're going to see that we bring a lot of data because we are very data driven to show and to present our projects that we work with the cities. So about space allocation, we also had a big shift from 21% of the space being allocated for pedestrians. And then after the intervention, we changed it for 70%. And talking a little bit about road safety, before the intervention, we interviewed people and they said, and only 11% of them said that they felt safe crossing the streets. And after the intervention, more than 80% of them said that they felt safe crossing the streets. And this is a data that I really like. It talks a little bit about how safe is the area. So if we have an increase of children walking and playing in the area, I think it's a successful project. So we always try to have this data of reduction of increase of kids playing in the area and reduction of them walking in the roadbed. So the pilot projects that started in 2013 led both the projects in Fortaleza for this transformation that I'm talking a little bit to you. So the bike lanes that were unsafe before, just like with paint, that looked like this, now are much more safer for all ages and abilities. This vast sea of asphalt, it was transformed into this big public space. Actually, this was one of the biggest projects we worked with more than 4,000 square meters reclaimed into public space. The name of this project is Dragão do Mar. And talking a little bit about space allocation one more time, we did the same really similar change space allocation shift with 24% of the space being dedicated to pedestrians before, and after 66% of the space was dedicated for pedestrians. This is also a big metric for us, the reduction of pedestrians walking in the roadbed, and this was one of the huge successes of Dragão do Mar intervention. And this is a big metric for us to the reduction of on average speeds on vehicles. So it was really good for the project to have this, because we had as you can see in the photo, we had a really wet street, and we narrowed it down to have this reduction. So we also, since we are talking about public spaces, we had 30 more people spending time in the new public spaces, and now kids have more room to play, and others too. It was really touching to see how everyone engaged in this intervention that we did in 2017. The city transformation continued, and other projects and other programs emerged, like this one in the central area, in downtown area. This was a commercial street that prioritized cars and now put pedestrians first. This street called Barão do Rio Branco has 75% of all the users, the people that walk around the street all day, they are pedestrians. But this metric wasn't reflected in the space allocation. So before the intervention, we had 2/3 of the space dedicated for vehicles. And after the intervention, we got to extend these infrastructure, the safe infrastructure for pedestrians, and we reduced in 92% the number of people walking outside designated facilities. And in this specific place where people would cross unsafely, we got to build a raised crossing and have more than 1,000 pedestrians crossing safely per hour. Also, one more time, talking about kids, we had 3 times more kids walking and using this safe facility than before the project. The transformations also happened where people most needed. And as I was talking about inequalities in the beginning of presentation, this is one of the most unequal areas in the city. It's really near the coast and is a place where everyone has like low income, and they didn't have public spaces in the neighborhood. So now they have a plaza, and this project, we discovered this week that this project is becoming a capital project this year. So this is amazing to see that these people, they will have like a permanent plaza in this place. Now they have a new meeting point for the neighbors, and the kids have a place to play. The good thing with the interventions in Fortaleza, this experience, was that it gave confidence for the city to go for capital projects. In the beginning, I don't know, you remember this area, I just showed you the first project that we did. So after the intervention, the population, including the business owners, they made a petition and to make it permanent, and they got it. This vast sea of asphalt before the intervention turned into a plaza where people can gather, can sit, can do business. So we did a lot of elements of road safety, and this crossing, the one that people felt really unsafe crossing, is now a pretty much safer raised crossing in the area. And this is another project that I wanted to show you too, because not all projects that are capital projects now, they had this interim phase before. I think the interventions are really important to convince people and to show that both projects can be capital. And this is the case of this project. This is a safe routes project in also a really poor area of Fortaleza. So this was a street, an open street, and now this is open just for pedestrians. So it's a plaza in front of a school for kids to play and to go after and before school. This is the area really. This is the same project, but it's another street in front of the school. So this is the reality now, and this is the capital project that the city just implemented. This is another example that was really important to the city. This is really one of the biggest corridors in the city, and they decided to maintain just 2 vehicle lanes and transform this right area here in a big sidewalk with a bike lane. And it's amazing to see that already there are a lot of new business emerging because of this transformation. So this is the same place in another intersection. So the intersections are raised, and this is much safer, and everyone feel so invited to use this area. So the good thing of having this project in Fortaleza is not that the city continued doing this and all border projects after the Bloomberg initiative, but also that Fortaleza got to inspire other cities in Brazil, especially the cities in the same region. I'm going to just show really quickly to you some projects that the cities of Salvador and Recife have been implementing. This one was in Salvador. So This was the first intervention that they made to transform this intersection in a safer intersection. This was the area before, it's a really important area in Salvador. And this is the area now. Also in Recife, we've implemented a bunch of projects with them by now since 2020. And this was one of the biggest interventions that we got. Now, this area, which is really similar to the one that I showed you from Fortaleza, has this big plaza and everyone is taking care of it. The population was really excited to have this transformation. And this is like the first, the intervention that I showed you in Fortaleza, the commercial street. This is a really similar project, but in Recife, they were inspired by this experience in Fortaleza, and they did this in a corridor in Recife, in the downtown area. And also talking about kids, after the intervention, we don't have any more kids walking or being carried in the roadbed, which tells us that the area is much safer now. And one thing that I wanted to highlight is that it's really important to listen to everyone. And after this intervention was made in Recife, other business owners from other areas next to this one, they started to demand a similar intervention in front of their shops, because they saw that the sales of the shops were growing, and they were really interested in having this intervention for them too. So just to finish really quick, I just wanted to highlight some points that we've learned after all these years. The first one is to listen to as many people as we can. Sometimes we are too stick for our offices, and we forget to listen to who really matters, and they will probably have the answers for the questions that we have about the project. Also to plan the intervention. I'm talking about intervention, and sometimes it seems simple, and it might seem simple to plan, but it's not, because it has also a lot of things that we have to plan, stakeholders, metrics. And this photo was took the day previous the implementation. We were already discussing some of the details of the project. Also have local allies. The interventions that we made are often really bold. So it's really important to have people on the committee that are on board, so they can talk to the others and can defend the project and can understand the project. Partner with expert. This is Eduardo is in the photo, and me. This was one of the last projects that we worked together in Fortaleza, and it's really important, especially when you're starting this process in interventions, to have someone that can teach you some things that you don't know. So the guides from GDCI help a lot, and they help in the implementation too. It doesn't have to be fancy. So you saw from the photos that is normally paint, some planters, and nothing really fancy or expensive to implement this kind of transformations. And finally, collect metrics and take pictures. This is going to be a deal breaker for all the interventions and to make the case. So if you have these photos and these data that we also had in these projects that we've implemented, it's going to be much easier to convince everyone that is not on board yet. So thank you. I hope I could take the time, and I'm really excited to discuss more about this.
Awesome. Thank you, Bia, and thank you, Eduardo, so much for setting us up, and then for giving us the story in Fortaleza and seeing how it's inspiring other cities in the area as well. It's really exciting to see. So congratulations again on such great work, and we've got a lot to dig into so far. I also want to make sure that we're including questions from our attendees. So I see many forum fellows are joining us today. So we welcome you to continue to plug your questions in via the Q&A button, and we'll consolidate and hopefully can include them in our conversation. So I'd like to actually jump right in and welcome our respondent to join us on screen now. So Jackson Chabot, I'm going to give you a little intro and then pass it off to you, is the Director of Public Space Advocacy at Open Plans. Since joining Open Plans, Jackson has led the advocacy efforts for Open Plans' proposal to create an Office of Public Space Management and building blocks a block-level placemaking process. So really excited to have Jackson join us as a representative from New York City as we think about how our cities can learn from each other and build more beautiful streets together. So welcome, Jackson. We're delighted to have you join the discussion. And I'll actually just start with a question to you to jump right in. I'd love to start with your reactions. What excites you most about the work shared by Bea and Eduardo, and what do you think we can learn from them here in New York?
Thanks, Martha. That's a wonderful first question. And first and foremost, thank you for including me as a respondent here. I told them last week that I wasn't going to do any preparations. I could be just as excited as all of you are or were for the presentation. But I have to admit, I snuck in a few articles beforehand. And both from the articles as well as from both of the presentations, it was several things. I think first, it was the centering of people. I came to this work because I was formerly a kindergarten teacher. And I think that we have to start with people. We have to start with our youngest users, as was highlighted in the presentation from a safety perspective. I think the second part that stood out, as I saw highlighted in the chat as well, which is wonderful, is color. And the color demonstrated that something had changed. It went from asphalt or concrete to an elevated form. And although the capital nature of the project hadn't been implemented in a lot of cases yet, the color showed the very clear difference. And I think that incremental change is really important as we consider what's possible for our streets and how they can be for people. So there's so many wonderful people on the call. I was looking through the participants and want to really shout out Jim Burke, Liz, I know you're on the call as well. People are doing this type of advocacy work on the ground in New York City as well. And so Martha, the last part is lessons learned for New York. Yeah, so I think the big thing that I saw, a lot of what I consider in our work is geometry. And before it came to the conversation, it was also highlighted in the presentation, is how 67% of the street space was allocated for motorized vehicles, although they were just 25% of the street users, and pedestrians accounted for 75% of the street users. And so I think we have the same type of current geometry allocation in New York City, and we need to, as the presentation highlighted, rethink that and reallocate space for people. As I think the Open Streets program has been a great start and push towards that. And I would love, as Jim Burke talks about, to have a network of open streets and how we can stitch together public spaces. And so that might be one question I'd love to hear from two of you about what's the efforts to both create public space as well as to have a network of public space so people can move safely through that. So I guess it's both individual locations as well as the connectivity.
Awesome. Thanks, Jackson. And that's great. And that was actually a question I was curious about too. So maybe we can actually start there. Bea and Eduardo, I know you showed us so many great examples of these individual streets that really went from primarily use for cars to really being vibrant public spaces. In the course of your projects, how, if at all, were you thinking about connecting the streets, and how were you thinking about possible kind of networks for the city as a whole? And maybe Bea, I'll pass it to you first.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's a really difficult thing to do, especially when it's really, it's a really big effort to even do the individual thing. But I think Fortaleza, for example, because it started earlier, I think it has been learning from other cities around the world and also trying to make these individual interventions in programs, which is really important for the city. So of course, I showed you, I tried to bring as much as projects that I could, but the city has, for example, a program to expand the cycling network, which is also really important. So the network in Fortaleza is now one of the biggest in the country, and more than 40% of the people lives next to a bike lane, which is also a really important public space. There is the Safe Routes to School program. There is the Cidade da Gente, which is the name of the program for interventions in Fortaleza. That means city of people. So all of the projects that started as pilot, they were graduated into programs, which is really important because it gives a little more strength to the project that we do and in the cities. And it's easier to spread out to the city. So I don't know if Edu has anything to add.
Yeah, I was thinking about the same thing, and like the different networks that form our cities of like different mobility modes and public spaces and different routes. It made me think a bit about the Sunday leisure bike lanes that are common in Brazil, and how this, of course, could be articulated as a mix of like temporary bike lanes and open streets to create this network that could be a possibility, or like learn from, you know, very cities that have those programs very consolidated, like Bogota or Medellin in Colombia, and like other examples in South America with the Ciclovia projects. These for kind of like more temporary spaces. And also, I think one very interesting trial that we see popping up, we heard from Barcelona here in the Streets Ahead series. We can talk about school zones and areas and the low traffic neighborhoods in the UK, and other examples that are popping up of neighborhood scale strategies to really filter out through traffic of vehicles to favor the movement of pedestrians and cyclists and create public space as well. So I think there are many possibilities, and part of the discussion, the solution can be kind of like avoid the overlap of some of these networks in space or in time, right? Like, so you can remove vehicles, the through movement of vehicles in a certain time of the day, or, you know, create a street that has local access only. That level of nuance helps a lot give options to communities on how to reduce the presence and the dominance of cars in their streets. It doesn't need to be all or nothing, like completely pedestrianized versus like car choked environment. There are like many other in between possibilities that are really exciting. We're seeing like bike boulevards in New York and other cities. Anyways, I'll stop here.
Thanks.
Those
thanks.
are great points. Martha, do you mind if I jump on that? So I love how you mentioned the Ciclovia, Eduardo, and that was one of the things I've been thinking about recently. I talked with a group of students who were thinking about park space, and from that, it got me inspired to think about how can we expand the New York City's weekend walk program to connect Central Park to Prospect Park in Brooklyn, to Flushing Meadows Park in Queens, and to Van Cortlandt Park in the Bronx. And like, how can we start creating a type of triangulation as you talk about space and time? And maybe it is just once a month in the summer, but how can we cascade that? Because I think another lesson I learned from the presentation was the incremental nature of change, but also I saw in the article, a lot of articles, the use of the word catalyze, and how can we catalyze more change? And I think therefore inspire people. So that stood out to me both from the Ciclovia perspective as well as the presentation is something I'd love to see in New York City.
Awesome. Thanks, Jackson, and thanks, Eduardo and Bia for really diving into the nuance here, right? I love what you said, Eduardo, of like it can't be all or nothing, that we need to be thinking about kind of a range of possibilities, and whether it's time scale or kind of multiple uses. So really appreciating that, and feeling inspiration for New York City too. So I want to actually jump in to start bringing in some audience questions, and I see a few that are coming up particularly around like, what do we do with cars? So Elisabetta in particular said, you know, I wonder how you dealt with all those cars that we saw parked in the before pictures. You know, did you ban parking on the road? And if so, you know, how was that perceived by the public? And a couple other folks, just to add some layers to these questions, Chelsea and Natalie brought in some questions about, you know, if vehicular traffic got shifted to other streets, how did residents, business owners, et cetera, react to that? So I'd love your reflections on kind of the ways that you thought about cars, car parking, and kind of rerouted transportation as you were thinking about these projects.
Yeah, I can start too. I think these are the biggest complaints that we have in all the projects: parking and vehicle traffic. It's always the same. So we know that we have to be prepared for this because we know that it's going to be a complaint. So normally what we do is kind of a strategy of thinking of what they are going to do, of their what they are going to complain about, but we are not going to offer them these parts right away because we know that they are going to ask for more. So we just like, okay, just take it all and negotiate a little bit, because normally we see by the service that we do that most of the people get there by bus, walking, or biking. So it's not matter of having these 10 parking spots there that is going to change everything. So especially in commercial areas, the business owners always say, we won't have more clients, they're going to go buy another place. And this is not true, because we know from other projects that the experience that we had is that business normally the sales, they increase the sales, this kind of intervention. So we try to negotiate a little bit. And about vehicle traffic, we always study the network, of course. We know that these can have an impact in other streets, and we don't want to transform a local street into a chaos. So especially having this careful look to local streets and small communities to don't transform them into something that we want to change in the street or the area that we are working with. So I think Edu can add more things, more insights to this, but normally I think it's something that everyone is worried about, because it's something that everyone complains about. And I agree that we have to be prepared for this in all the interactions that we have with the community, and try to explain what's the biggest goal of the interventions, that have more space for people, more safe spaces for people. And since we are doing interventions, one thing that we can say is, okay, we are going to do this intervention for a period of 3 months. If everything goes wrong, we can talk again about this, and we can discuss about the strategies that we can have for the area. So I think it's a good thing to talk with them too.
Yeah, thanks, Via. I really like what you said about the number of users of like each of the modes, and how many people are really parking on those spots, or even like driving through that street, and kind of like making all people visible, not only drivers. And streets is hard. It's hard in the process. It's hard in the conversation. You know, it's always like a loud voice. That one of drivers. So one thing that I really like about how Gia presented the project is how it's most of the time about changing the conversation. It's like showing the benefits for pedestrians, showing the accessibility benefits, the benefits for cyclists, showing how many people lose their lives every year due to traffic violence, and that most people are out of cars, and that the benefits are about public space, accessibility, livability, community, etc. So kind of like bring the benefits and the co-benefits, make them as visible as possible, help balance the conversation with the concerns around cars. A second point is it's really important in a project like that, like the public space component, and even the colors and how it looks like, is that people perceive the transformation as a positive replacement of something for something else. So it's not that we, like the city took space out from cars because of any, no, it's, dedicating or reallocating space for people and to create public space. What is it for? What's the reason? And make that clear in the conversations before the interventions, and also like in the design itself, the elements that we choose, the colors, and how we elevate, like people using the space, and make people value that transformation. I think one example that we probably already take for granted at this point in New York City is Times Square. It was like a lot of car space taken out, but like it made sense immediately, almost like without explanation, that was, you know, like should be a public space for people to use and like reduce the conflicts, the space allocation, and all that. So that positive replacement from car space to something else. And just finally on traffic evaporation, we don't have, like in any of these projects, we didn't get to the point of like studying systematically parallel streets, but there are people doing that. Many of the low traffic neighborhoods in the UK are doing those studies, and the results in general show that in some cases, cases it's mixed. In some cases, it's, you know, like mostly beneficial, but they show some level of traffic evaporation. So traffic wasn't diverted to parallel streets, but it simply got like trips were avoided or were done in different modes, or, you know, like other alternatives were taken. And also the long-term mode shift also happened. So I encourage seeing some of those studies from the low traffic neighborhoods in the UK.
I love the term traffic evaporation. That feels like something we should like bring into our lexicon for how we think about transforming our cities. Jackson, before I take us somewhere else, any kind of thoughts, reactions, inspiration for how New York can be thinking about how we deal with cars?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I love the point about space and time that you made earlier, Eduardo, and it reminds me of the New York Times article that highlights Cambridge, Massachusetts, and Memorial Drive. So if you all haven't seen that, it's from about a year ago, and it talks a bit about some of that ephemerality that is necessary in public space creation. And like, what is creation? Is it only for an hour? Is it for a day? Is it for 15 days, as the presentation highlighted? And then ideally, in my mind, how can we get to permanent there? But that kind of process, as we talk about. And then the second part that I just want to highlight is from the traffic violence perspective and the safety perspective. In New York City, we're seeing last year was the most violent year on record for Vision Zero, and this year is already off to a very violent traffic violence is already very high across the city, but particularly impacting children and impacting seniors. We saw a 99-year-old Holocaust survivor be hit and killed as he was in his wheelchair crossing the road in South Brooklyn trying to go to the temple with his friends. We saw a 5-year-old and a 10-year-old in two separate cases, a 19-year-old, like the list goes on. And so I think when I think about this work, it has to start with safety. And we think about the traffic evaporation, we think about car dependency and moving towards a safer environment. It has to start there. So I know that's heavy, but I feel like it's really crucial to the conversation. And one of the things I'm uniquely and keenly interested in, I guess, is twofold. One is the political will necessary to build consensus for these projects, as well as on the other end, public facing, the community engagement component. I know that was community engagement was a common theme in the Q&A about process. So I don't know if that's where you're going to take us, Martha, but that stood out for me from what I'm seeing in the Q&A as well.
Awesome. Thanks, Jackson. Yeah, and excited to hopefully get to those pieces as well. I do want to make sure we also tackle the big kind of M question of maintenance. So maybe we'll start there and then loop back to thinking about how we build momentum for these projects. So just real quick, and Jackson, I've got a question for you on this too, since I know you think a lot about maintenance. But and this actually comes from one of our UDF fellows is on the call, Dorian Duncan, and curious about how you thought about maintenance as you worked towards implementing these permanent designs. I know going from temporary to permanent, this is one of the kind of biggest challenges we face in New York City, is who's going to maintain, how, et cetera. So curious how you thought about that, whether that involved kind of government collaboration or community partners. Would just be curious how you approach that. And Edu or Bia. Yeah.
Okay.
Sure.
You can start. Do you want to start? Okay. No, I was just going to say that each project has a different story. And in the beginning, I'm going to be honest, we weren't thinking about maintenance or what's going to be the permanent project or anything about this. We were doing and learning as we implemented. So we learned a lot about materials, specifically on this process. So for example, that first intervention, the idea was to leave it there for 15 days. And then the population said we wanted to be permanent. But the materials we had chosen in the beginning, they weren't going to last 3 months or a year until the capital project started to be constructed. So we had to renovate everything a lot of times in this first experience because the paint, the furniture, nothing was going to survive these 6 months, or I think it was a year until the capital project to be constructed. So we started to think more about the conditions of the painting, especially, and the furniture that we were using, and trying to match this with the schedule for the intervention. So if the intervention was supposed to last 3 months, we tried to search for materials that were going to last 3 months without having to maintain, because this part is, I think it's one of the hardest in the government, because someone is responsible for the signing, the paints, and someone is responsible for the furniture, and they sometimes don't work together. So it's really important to at first think about the materials. And in Fortaleza, normally it was easy because it was one group that was responsible for all of the materials. So this was the easy part. But for some projects, we had to wait many more time than we were expecting in the beginning. So the idea is to try to think about the materials and to renovate once in a while, or even try to use more durable materials for the interventions that we think that the population is going to approve, because we don't know when we first start. So sometimes we have to change a little bit of geometry or some furniture, and sometimes we can anticipate these details. But I think it's all about thinking about the timing and the type of materials that we use for the interventions.
Thanks, Bia. Jackson, I actually want to kick it to you because I know at Open Plans you're advocating for an Office of Public Space Management to address some of the challenges of equitable access to public space maintenance across the city. I'm curious, how do you think New York can learn from cities like Fortaleza and think about new models for management and maintenance of these new types of public spaces?
Thanks, Martha. That's a great question. I think the first part that I'd elevate is from what Beatriz said, is talking, and this is maybe like paraphrasing of what she said, but thinking about design as the management. And so choosing the right materials from the outset, I think, is crucial. And that's what I heard from what you just said. And I think the second part is equitable distribution of resources. So I know we haven't talked about city budgets, but I did see a question in the Q&A about resource allocation. I think New York City could do a lot more, for example, fully funding the Parks Department. There's a Play Fair campaign in the 1% for parks. And so I'd love to see that happen, because it's a really integrated, the approach is really necessary to be integrated. There has to be parks. We have to fund things like the cleanup corps, which have put people on the street to pick up trash. And so all of these components. But I think overarchingly, what we believe is that we need a government framework that centers care, management, and maintenance of public space, and particularly public space that's more like unconventional, in the sense that streets and sidewalks are also public space, but right now they're for the storage and movement for vehicles. And so I'll end with a paraphrase from Emily Weindoff, who's at the public space unit of the Department of Transportation. And in a previous conversation, she was talking about how public space is much more like a pet rather than a child. The child grows up and becomes self-sufficient, but the pet is where you need to feed it, walk it, take care of it on a daily or weekly basis. And so I think as we consider maintenance, management, and care of public spaces in New York City, we need to remember that pets, as children do too, but pets require consistent allocation of time, love, attention, and money to make sure that they're healthy and successful. So I would love the city to embrace that type of system and resource allocation.
Awesome. Thanks, Jackson. Well, as a new pet owner myself, that resonates. That we are, it's true, constant maintenance of our pets. So I know we're nearing the end of our time, but I want us to just think briefly for our final question together about, looking forward. So I'd love to hear, as a final go round from each of you, just a couple sentences about like, what do you think is most important for cities like Fortaleza, for cities like Brazil, to keep building momentum, to keep building political will for this type of work? What do you think we need to do to keep this type of work going? And just a few sentences from each of you would be great. Maybe Eduardo, can we start with you?
Yeah, Eduardo, yeah.
If I can be very brief, I think work together, I think those transformations they look like a technical thing and like a decision from a department, but they are, like from the society, they should be in the public debate, and people value those discussions and conversations. And, if they don't participate in that process, you'll never get like to the full potential. So it's like working together with communities, with advocacy groups, and like understand what are the needs, look out for other cities, countries, what they're doing. And yeah, like that is fundamental, like to work together and make sure this is a collective effort.
Thanks, Edu. Jackson, maybe I'll pass it to you next if you're ready. We'll
sure. That's great. I'll amplify and build on what Eduardo said. I think I would say it's work together, it's also grow together. And so the three pieces I wrote down are organize, advocate, and educate. And I think that that's a collective process that needs to happen. I want to shout out the Thrivance group. And so thinking about in the community engagement process, education, prompting communities to ask for more, particularly communities that haven't been invested in, and have them demand their fair share of resources and help them and work with them and support their work, demanding for more resources and demanding for better and demanding for safer. And I think that takes that organizing and advocacy.
Awesome. Thanks, Jackson. And Bia, we'll close with you, our wonderful presenter today.
Yeah, I was going to talk a little bit of they already did, like engagement and empowering communities. But since they already did, I'm going to add another layer in this conversation. That's make sure that we have all the tools to communicate with them, and that we are prepared to talk with them. It's not a matter of engaging, but also engaging the right way with the right people, and make sure that everyone that matters is sitting on the table of the decision makers. So I think it's important to have this in mind too.
Thank you so much. And I know I wish we could have dug more into all the great community engagement work you did, and just recognizing there's so much great work here to discuss, and we often can't get to everything in an hour. So unfortunately we are out of time. So I want to thank Eduardo and Bia again for sharing the exciting work that you've been leading in Fortaleza and beyond. I'm feeling so inspired by your bold approach and the example that you're setting for, really to think ambitiously about what we can do with our streets and our public realm. And of course, I want to thank Jackson, our wonderful New York representative, for joining us in the conversation. And finally, I also want to thank our fellows and friends for tuning in and for asking such thoughtful questions in the chat. And of course, my colleague and co-pilot, Guillermo Gomez, for his background technical support today. We also want to thank our fellows, our board of directors, our director circle, again, for your continuous support of the forum. So make sure to join us in 2 weeks on March 10th for a conversation on combating emissions in Medellin, Colombia. And stay tuned for an announcement of a conversation with leaders in Paris later in March. So we've got lots of great ways to continue the conversation. So hope you all will join us as well. And if you have projects or plans that you'd like to discuss, please feel free to reach out to us at the forum. So thank you again, everyone, for joining, and have a great afternoon.